All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Stephanie Atkins Sharp, and I want to welcome you to the UCD Lunch and Learn series for today. And today's topic will be health misinformation, and it's going to include myself as well as my colleague, Kathy Carter. And we're both from the UTRGV School of Medicine Libraries. Next slide. So today's presentation, we are going to be using this PowerPoint slide that we modified from the Office of the U.S. Surgeon General Community Toolkit for Addressing Health Misinformation. And Kathy has put together a PDF of this presentation, so you can have this after today. And we highly recommend that you explore this website because it includes not only the full presentation, as well as workbook, infographics, flyers, both in English and in Spanish. So it's a really great resource for you. Next slide. So to start off this presentation, it's important to say, what is health misinformation? Well, it's information that is false, inaccurate, or misleading according to the best available evidence at the time. So a lot of times, misinformation has been covered a lot lately. And in terms of health misinformation, we often see it posted on the internet, many times on social media, and then it's shared via text messages or email. So even though health misinformation can be, available on the web or social media, it can also come from, speeches, pamphlets, and posters, some news outlets, as well as advertisements. And one thing that we really want to stress in this presentation is that a lot of times this misinformation is shared by people who really don't know that the claims are false or misleading. Like, they truly come from a place that they want to help others by sharing this information. And a lot of times the rationale why people are sharing this misinformation is that they really want to, raise concerns that they have in their community. A lot of times they're also, trying to make sense of kind of conflicting information that they're hearing from other people, or they're seeing on social media or the web. And they're oftentimes coming from a well-intentioned place in terms of just really seeking answers to honest questions that they have. So the key point that we want to make is that we can all be vulnerable to misinformation. As much as I try as a librarian, as an information professional, none of us are completely immune to maybe either spreading or contributing to misinformation. So here is a really important quote coming from our current U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Murthy. So, misinformation sometimes can be spread intentionally to serve either like a malicious purpose, such as, tricking people to believe something for either financial or political gain. In these situations, that's usually called disinformation. But we want to stress again that many people who share misinformation are really not trying to misinform. They really are, like we said before, trying to raise concerns, making sense of, the various information that they are seeing or reading, and are really, once again, seeking answers to honest questions that they have. So the first thing that we want to engage with you about is, can you think of an example of health misinformation that you've seen lately? And if you can share in the Q&A, where did you see it or hear it? And who shared it with you? So just take a few minutes to give you some time to post your example. Yes, Dahlia, you're right. Information regarding the COVID-19 vaccine. Yeah, there's been various claims about the vaccine, either through the media or even politicians. And yeah, it has created quite a bit of confusion. That's a really good example.
And if it's easier for you to post your example in the chat as opposed to the Q&A box, you're welcome to do that. I don't see any other comment stuff, but if you want to go ahead and move on, I'll continue to moderate the chat and share any examples as they come in.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so yeah, if we could go to the next slide. So the toolkit from the U.S. Surgeon General provides these 7 common types of health misinformation. And so, if you're on social media like Facebook or Instagram, you may run across these memes, which are fun, colorful images or graphics that are created as a joke, but occasionally people will think this information is true. Also, we see a variety of websites that are out there. Some of them that look very professional, may even look like a reputable news site, but that the stories are actually either false or misleading. And you can sometimes identify them because they have very sensational headlines to make that are specifically designed to make us want to click and read more about the story. Quotations where, they are taken out of context and therefore they change the actual meaning. The person may have said something, but without the full context, it actually isn't really a fair representation of what they were trying to say. And old images, that is also very tricky because sometimes images that from the past are then recirculated as if they're actually photos of recent events. And yeah, that has been also very common on social media, with with images of these large crowds, and people are saying, this is happening now during lockdown due to the pandemic, but really the photo was taken in 2019 or pre-pandemic times. Misleading graphics or diagrams that look very official, but really do not tell the whole story or are very, like it says, misleading. And another common practice is also cherry picking statistics. It's very easy for people to kind of choose numbers that are going to support their arguments, but without that data contextualized, it actually really is not accurate. And then also we run across a lot on social media as well, is that, these videos that have been edited, and because of the editing, it really changes the meaning of what people are saying or what you're seeing. So as the Surgeon General Murthy says in this quote, as you can see, a lot of misinformation isn't completely false or fake, but that the information just lacks the context to, and that sometimes, that kernel of truth to it is much more believable. So the next part of the presentation is, why is it so tempting to share health misinformation? Well, here are some, situations that we could all kind of see ourselves maybe, being susceptible to. So, we're looking online, we're looking on social media, and we think that we've found a new information that maybe others don't know about. And so you're just trying to, be a good citizen and share that information. Also, people are really coming from a good place because they're sharing this information because they want to protect the people they care about. And when people are often asked about their online sharing habits, oftentimes it's quote like this, sometimes I share things I see without checking first, but honestly, I feel that it's better to be safe than sorry. There's many things that are going on in the world, and sometimes it's very confusing and unsettling. So a lot of times people will share misinformation because they're really trying to make sense of what's going on in the world. And then also very understandable and identifiable reason why people share is they want to feel connected with others. We're very social beings, and we want communities, and we want to share information to, support our communities. So the next thing is, understanding why people create or share harmful information. And as the Surgeon General notes, we may not fully understand why someone shares or creates harmful information. And it's sometimes not very clear, what their intentions are, and even their intentions may change over time. But I think the really important takeaway is that rather than jumping to conclusions and calling out your friends or family about sharing harmful information, listen first and engage in an open conversation. So here are, with the spectrum that we have below, from creators to sharers, here are, some prototypes of people who create or share harmful information. So there's, people that are, categorized as disinformer, sorry, they deliberately create harmful disinformation. There's others that can be described as mischief makers. So they create false and misleading information because they like to trick and fool people, and it's just purely for their own enjoyment. And then those that are hoaxsters, they like to, create hoaxes to fool people, and that they may actually get a financial gain by doing so. Then moving towards mid part of the continuum, we have people that are enthusiasts. So they post misinformation frequently because they're very passionate in support of a person or a particular cause. And others would be believers. They're very deeply connected to an online community that may be pushing false or misleading claims. And they firmly believe the information but shared by this community is true, and they want to share it with others. And then once we get fully over to the sharers part of the spectrum, we have those that are oversharers. So, you see something online that seems helpful, or maybe you're worried about, and you just, want to share it to, your friends and family, but you don't necessarily always check to see if the information is accurate. And then there's, a lot of us are also could be described as casual sharers. We all spend a lot of time online, and so sometimes as we're waiting in line at the grocery store or scrolling late at night, sometimes we'll just share information without really investigating it further. So I'll turn it over to my colleague, Kathy, that will now present with the rest of the presentation.
Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about is, now that you have a good understanding, hopefully, of what misinformation and disinformation are, and the various types and ways that people spread misinformation, we wanted to share some strategies with you for how you might go about talking with friends and family and people in your community, your clients, about misinformation, knowing that it can be really frustrating to have these conversations and very challenging. But to kind of repeat what Steph said, taking a step back and really trying to meet the people where they are and understand their motivations and their perspective is a really good place to start. So we're going to roll through these strategies with you, and hopefully you'll find these helpful. So the first recommendation is, of course, just to listen, to start by listening. Pause, take a deep breath, take a step back, and just try to get an understanding of the person's fears and beliefs. Where are they coming from? Try to focus on the bigger issue and to hone in on how they feel about it. There's a lot of emotion around some of these topics that can be very controversial, politicized. So just try to understand their feelings and perspectives about it. And also, I am guilty of this, I will admit. As a librarian, my first instinct is to fact check and point out sources to people, but this can often shut down a conversation and backfire because the person doesn't feel like you really want to listen and hear and meet them halfway. So I think that starting a conversation with fact checking can often shut things down and not have the desired result. The second recommendation is to practice empathy, to empathize. Emphasize the fact that you understand why people find it difficult to trust. Trusting is hard, and it's harder for some than others. So that trust factor, understanding and empathizing with that is important. Ask questions to understand. Asking people questions demonstrates that you really are interested in what they have to say. And I think Steph shared some examples, in her own experience. Admit that you've struggled, show your vulnerability, talk about times where you may have fallen for misinformation. And I can also say, even as a librarian, I'm guilty. I have fallen for misinformation. I think it's getting a lot harder to separate the good stuff from the bad stuff. So admitting that vulnerability is a good way to relate to another. Next is to point to credible sources. So after you've listened, you've shared, then there might be an opportunity to start steering the person towards some credible sources. And just as a teaser, we will be doing a part 2 of this webinar where we're going to focus on those credible sources. So please come back and we'll share those with you. But underscore the finding that finding accurate information can be really hard, especially online. It's vast, there's so much there. So, just explain that. Emphasize the need to find credible sources. And I think this last one is really important, especially with the pandemic. I think reminding people that an expert on one topic might not be the best in another topic. And we see this even in the world of medicine, where physicians can have very specific specialties. And while they may be very knowledgeable and competent and experienced and wise in their field, this other area may not really be their area of expertise. And so recognizing that expertise differs even within the profession of medicine, I think is an important thing to point out. And then next, don't publicly shame. Social media is a place where we see this a lot. Try to have conversations one-on-one. Be gentle in your replies. Again, be empathetic. And have conversations in the having conversations in the comments of a social media post has the potential to backfire. So, shaming people in a public setting is never a good idea. And then also remember to use inclusive language, show how you sometimes struggle, and use language that makes it clear that you see yourself being impacted. So again, relating to the person, using language that they understand, don't talk down to them, don't preach, just relate and empathize, and again, just share language that you think they'll understand. And so just as another exercise, we know that all of you have expertise in your fields and I'm sure have dealt with this issue. So we're curious to know, have you tried to talk about health misinformation with someone you know or someone that you work with? We'd like to know, how did it go and what did you learn from the experience? And so if any of you have had an experience that you'd like to share either in the chat or the Q&A, please do so. That way we can kind of learn from you. I'm always trying to pick up tips from others. And so you have a lot of expertise to share. So we invite you to share that in the chat if you feel so moved to do so. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to talk a lot about this particular topic in this webinar, but again, we'll pick this up in part 2 of our Health Misinformation Lunch and Learn series. But if you do decide to refer to the toolkit from the US Surgeon General, there's a great section in the toolkit on common disinformation tactics. And what this is referring to are the strategies and tactics that disinformers use to get their information out and spread and viral and whatever it is that you want to call it. So it walks through some things that as you're looking at information, things to look for. And so we'll cover this, like I said, more in the second part of the webinar. But if you are curious, take a look at the toolkit, and we've provided a link to that in the slide deck for the presentation. One of the resources that's in the toolkit that I think is really helpful as you are looking at information and trying to determine whether it's trustworthy or not is this toolkit resource called the Health Misinformation Checklist. And what it is, it's just a systematic process that you can use to kind of go through and look at the information to determine if it meets the criteria for good information or if it has the potential to be misinformation or disinformation. So we're going to walk through the checklist with you. But one thing to note is that if you go through the checklist and you're still not sure if the information is something you can trust, a good rule of thumb is if you're not sure, don't share. Only share things that you are for sure confident about and that you know comes from a credible source. So the first part of the health misinformation checklist is to check with the CDC or local public health department to see whether there is any information about a particular claim being made. So again, this just points back to going to those authority figures, those organizations that we know are trusted and that have the public interest in mind. So take a look at those organizations and see what they have to say about the information that you are reviewing. Next, ask a credible healthcare professional, such as your doctor or nurse, if they have any additional information. And we always recommend this in the library. We do have from time to time patients that do come in seeking information about a condition. So we provide that information, but always with the disclaimer that it's best to discuss that information with their healthcare provider. And any credible, reliable health information resource is almost always going to have that disclaimer. I can think of some of the resources that I use a lot with patients, and almost always you'll see a comment that, you know, that information should be discussed with your healthcare provider. So that's a good rule of thumb to follow. And next, try typing the claim into a search engine like Google to see if it has been verified by a credible source. So take the information that you find in, let's say, a social media post, and then just do a search for it online to see if you can find a resource to back up that claim. Oftentimes on the web, you can find that certain claims or posts, memes, photographs, things like that have been debunked. So there are lots of good resources out there to help you check the credibility of a source. And so it's always good to do that. The other thing that we also recommend is that you take a look at the About Us page on a website to see if you can trust the source. So any credible site is going to provide a lot of information about who they are, what they do, and the credentials of the people that create and publish and put the information out there. So taking a look at the About Us page on a website is a great way to find out if the site has some bias, if they have an angle, are they trying to do things to disinform potentially? Do they gain anything from the information being spread? So take a look and find out on a website who's producing that information. And usually what I tell people is if there isn't an About Us section, then that's a red flag. Any credible organization is very transparent about who they are and what they do and how they produce their information. And of course, if you're not sure, don't share. We'll leave you with that. So once again, in the slide deck, we do have a link to the U.S. Surgeon General Toolkit on Health Information, which is where all of this information came from. Their website, you can access it there, has some additional great resources that might be useful to you in your agencies, infographics, flyers, they're available in English and Spanish. So if health misinformation is an issue for you, highly recommend you take a look at the resources the Surgeon General has on their health misinformation website. And that's it. So our contact information is there. Steph's email and my email. Again, we're with UTRGV School of Medicine. And we would love to hear from you. If there's something we can do to assist you with your health misinformation efforts, please let us know. And I think it is 12:29 and we are just about at the end of this webinar. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the meeting with the UTRGV School of Medicine. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will send out more information to you. Thank you all.